Thank you for tuning into the Innovator's Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Seth Narayanan, founder and CEO of Telient Systems. Our guest today is Dr. Frank Basile, CEO of Aegis Sciences Corporation, a leading company reshaping the frontier of healthcare diagnostics. Frank seamlessly bridges clinical expertise with corporate evolution, starting with McKinsey, then moving on to healthcare organizations such as DaVita, Diabetes America, and leading major transformations at Miracle Life Sciences. Today, he is driving Aegis to pioneer the data-driven lab tools, rewriting the playbook on patient care and public health. We are diving into how he scales complex science and fosters culture-driven agility and leads breakthrough health care innovation. Frank, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Seth. That's very kind of you. Appreciate the introduction and delighted to be here.
So, Frank, let's start in the beginning so we can get the viewers caught up on your background and how you got into this current role. It evolved from a sports testing lab in the 1990s to serving over 4,000 plus clients and clinics in clinical toxicology today. So, if you could give the viewers a background on the company itself.
Sure, of course. Yeah, that's right. The company began its life really as a collaboration with Vanderbilt University and started off around the late 80s, around 1990, to be more precise, in doing sports testing for the sports programs over at Vanderbilt. Over the next 10 to 12, maybe 15 years, it was primarily focused on sports testing, the normal performance enhancing drugs, and also began to sort of move into testing for some of the illicits as well. In the early part of this century, around 2003, 4, 5, the company began to move into toxicology testing for clinical clients, for clinical customers, because there was a need at that time evolving around the prescription of opiates and the need to test patients for their compliance or non-compliance with treatment. And so the current iteration of the company really began around 2003, 4, and then we progressed since then. We had a brief hiatus during COVID where at the very beginning, like a lot of things, toxicology testing slowed down a lot. And so we began and did a lot of COVID testing during the 2021, 22 and into 23. But our toxicology business has remained with us and still continues to grow to this day. These days, we process about 1.6 million samples a year in our lab. And as you mentioned, we have about 4,000 clinics as customers around the United States. We're national. We accept samples from pretty much anywhere in the United States. All of our work, all our lab work is done in Nashville, Tennessee, which is where our company is located and headquartered and where our lab is.
So, Naveen, obviously this sounds like a very successful and crucial business, especially in the healthcare field. But what attracted you to this role? And maybe go back a little bit, how you got started. I know you started working with the consulting company, McKinsey. How did your journey progress and you finally ended up with Aegis?
Sure. Of course. I actually trained as a physician in Australia, which is where I'm originally from. And I've been interested in healthcare and human health for over 40 years, maybe 45 years. I was working as a doctor and then was fortunate enough to find a way toward working with McKinsey and Company in Melbourne. They brought me in to help grow their healthcare practice. They actually sent me to Los Angeles to get some additional skills and exposure there. Along the way, I met a lot of great people, one of whom was a gentleman by the name of Ken Theory, who was the CEO of a dialysis company. He hired me to work with him at a company called Vivra, which is a dialysis company. That was subsequently bought. And then a year later, he transitioned to a different company called Total Renal Care. And then I joined him there. And Total Renal Care became DaVita. I spent a bit of time in dialysis, and then following dialysis, I spent a little bit of time in a couple of other healthcare organizations. But what really struck me was the importance of the critical nature of diagnostics. And so I began to think that I really wanted to kind of focus more in that space. As a physician, working as a doctor, being in healthcare, what you learn fairly quickly is the value of the information that you receive really can bend the nature of the course of treatment for a patient, and it influences at least 2/3, maybe more, of all your decisions. And so I felt like this is something that I really wanted to be a part of and get focused on that. So I worked with an anatomical pathology company called Miraca Life Sciences, which was a really great experience. And then from there, was recruited by Abri Partners to come and work at Aegis Sciences, which I joined in 2017. One of the attractions about Aegis was that at the time, 2016, 2015, 2017, there was really kind of a lot of heat, a lot of energy around the opioid epidemic. A lot of opiates had been prescribed. A lot of patients had fallen into addiction. And, there was also this sort of critical nature that the market was changing. A lot more synthetics were starting to appear. And so, to me at least, it felt like Aegis was really at the epicenter of something really major, this epidemic and efforts to control it, which requires testing. I'll talk about that in a moment. The proliferation of these synthetics, which requires really sophisticated testing, which led me to think that Aegis would be just a fantastic platform to pursue an avenue where at least I could see a lot of impact or potential impact on human health or on health care in general.
Very interesting. So for those that don't fully comprehend what is toxicology, can you explain a little bit more maybe what toxicology is and how does it impact patients and clinicians in terms of the value it provides?
Yeah, happy to. So we deal with primarily two types of patients in our practice: chronic pain patients and as well as substance use disorder patients. In the United States today, there are about 20 million people who suffer from what I would call impactful or debilitating chronic pain. Not all those are treated with opiates, but many are. And for many people, it's really the only way that they can lead a normal life. So it's important to manage and treat these patients, because anyone who's experienced chronic pain or lived with it knows that it can radically affect your quality of life. And on the other side, the substance use disorder, there are roughly about 20 million people with some form of substance use disorder. This excludes people with alcohol related, which is sort of doubles the number in the United States, but 20 million people. And a lot of those also have a coinciding mental health concern or issue. And so for those people, probably only 1 in 5 actually are in treatment. The critical importance of substance use disorder and the treatment of it is that, with the right care and oversight, these people also can lead lives that are much higher in quality and avoid a lot of the negative downsides of addiction, including hospitalization and or death. So it's a big, big group of people out there. These patients on the chronic pain side are treated with opiates. By and large, at the moment, this present day, there isn't really anything better for chronic pain that works or works as well. And so on that side, if you're prescribing these medicines, it's important as a physician that you are testing your patients periodically to make sure, A, that they're taking the medicine you prescribe them, and B, that they are not diverting, that is, using the medicine in ways in which they're not taking it and maybe selling it or trading it for other kinds of things. And so you want to make sure that it's there. And you also want to check if it isn't there. And then if it isn't there, what else are they taking? And so you're looking for evidence of illicit drug use. It's really important because if you think about it, if you prescribe opiates and you don't test, you really are running a huge risk, and your patient's running a huge risk, because we've seen this. People do move off the path and sort of end up in bad places. And so it's incumbent on the physician who's prescribing this medicine to really make sure that the patients are compliant. So those samples come to us and we test them. Usually their urine, sometimes their saliva, occasionally their blood. We test them in the lab and we obviously provide a report. On the substance use disorder side, those patients are often being treated with buprenorphine or sometimes methadone. It's the same thing. You want to make sure that the patients are taking the medicine that they've been prescribed and that they're not moving into and taking other kinds of things that are much riskier. Those risks have really increased in the past decade, especially in the past 5 years, where there's this proliferation of synthetic substances and all kinds of counterfeit and fake pills, where people are mostly inadvertently consuming something that's essentially harmful to them rather than helpful. Our job as a lab is to provide doctors with a report that shows them what's in their patient, either what's expected, and then also to show them what's unexpected. One of the critical things that's happened over the past 5 years is that there's been this tremendous upsurge in synthetics. A lot of illicit drugs now are manufactured in labs. Molecules are tweaked so that they have the efficacy of whatever they're supposed to be, whether it's a synthetic benzodiazepine or designer benzodiazepine or a cannabinoid or an opiate like a fentanyl. But the tweaking also helps you avoid detection. So one of the really important things that we do as a lab is we keep our testing methods and profile up to date to the degree we can, which we update it twice a year, to sort of stay abreast of what's going on, because many patients will be tested and doctors will see nothing to worry about, nothing to be concerned about. But in reality, that may mean that the test that was performed just didn't pick up what's actually in the patient. And so the design of that test and the scope of that test actually matters. And one of the things about toxicology that's really interesting is that not all toxicology tests are equal. From lab to lab, there'll be differences in what the lab is able to actually see. And that's a crucial distinction in our space, where in most testing, most clinical testing, the testing that's done is fairly standard and the range of analytes or measurands are well known. In our space, this is constantly changing and evolving. And so if your lab testing framework was set up in 2020 or 2019 and hasn't changed much since then, there's a lot that you're not going to be able to see. And we see this in our patients and in the testimonials and the feedback we get from our customers, where customers tell us the testing that we did showed that my patient was taking a different kind of synthetic fentanyl or a different kind of designer benzodiazepine in combination with an opiate that can be very dangerous. And so the ability to see these things and show doctors these things enables them then to work with their patients and talk about the risks that they are encountering and counsel them on how to avoid those risks. And as a result, our testing saves lives. That's a true statement based upon the feedback that we've received from numerous customers. Honestly, the key there is being able to show the doctor what's actually in the patient, which requires sort of this up-to-date menu rather than something that's based upon several years ago. Because that's the fundamental challenge in our space, this idea that things are moving all the time.
Yeah. So for you, the innovation is in that obviously you're not using off the shelf, well publicized, maybe publicly available recipes for drugs, but you're always looking out for what's coming out there. And how do you prioritize that? I'm sure there is a lot that is coming out of all the countries around the world that are trying to get to our population in terms of drug users. Is there some kind of process through which you prioritize? Do you focus on things that are more life-threatening than others? So can you talk about that a little bit?
We have a team of clinical pharmacists who works inside our company, as well as an R&D team of scientists. And we are constantly vigilant or looking for reports. DEA publishes reports of what it's finding, seizing. There's other third parties who are publishing reports. One of them is CSFRE, which is the Center for Forensic Research. They publish a report on a quarterly basis as to what they're seeing, what they're observing in the environment. We also pay attention to local media reports. We get feedback from our customers. All of that is funneled into a database. And so we're constantly looking at, do we have this analyte covered? Can we measure that? So we walk through that list, and ultimately every 6 months, we'll probably find about 30 to 35 things that we need to add. We'll do it based upon whether they appear in any of those reports and what the feedback we're getting from the market is and the customers and so forth. At the same time, we look at our reporting and we look and see what haven't we seen for the last year. There are some things that just used to be popular, but they just drop out of the drug supply. And so we look at what we're not seeing, and typically we'll find 20, 25 things that are essentially dead. They're not in the market anymore. And so we'll sort of take the stance that we'll take those out and we'll add some new things in. So that's our process, and it's collaborative amongst the various groups in our organization, our clinical pharmacists, our R&D team, who do a fantastic job, and also in concert with our sales group and our sort of client-facing groups who are also talking to and interacting with customers. So we have the ability to twice a year review our analyte set and sort of consider like, hey, we're going to add these 30, I'm going to take these 20, 25 out or whatever, The next step is that what we do then is we actually have to look for standards. We have various suppliers that we work with around the world. The only way we can actually measure or find something is to get the standard. And so we acquire the standards and we start to work on our own methods to figure out a way to identify those analytes. Our workhorse platform is the liquid chromatography tandem mass spec. And so in our world, when we kind of figure out we've got the standard, we've got the set of analytes, we then start to figure out how to actually turn this into a test. Our test has got really kind of 3 or 4 stages. The first stage is we have to separate the components in a liquid column. And that's sort of a chemistry problem. And then we shoot an ion stream to separate these based upon mass charge ratio. So we're looking at the molecular level. That we then use that result and we collide it with an inert gas like nitrogen. We split those, or we find some of those parent molecules, create some daughter molecules, and then we put those through the mass spec a second time to ultimately read what's in the sample. Our testing is a combination of chemistry to figure out how to prepare the sample, and then the time and the pressure and the specific details around how the mass spec actually operates, those have to be tweaked and worked to kind of make sure that we can actually find the thing that we're looking for. And so we call that the method, which in a simple way is the recipe. And so we create these recipes. Typically, we're looking for 200 to 300 analytes at the same time because we push all those new analytes into our existing method, because economically it would be virtually impossible to do this in sort of separate methods. And so that complexity creates another level of complexity, which we usually are able to overcome with software and other tools that we have developed, mostly developed in-house, to help us capture the data, because at the end of this is a big data capture challenge. And then we have to create a report that's actually understandable to a human being, because at the end of the day, all of our reports are determined or read by a certifier who makes a determination as to what's actually in the sample. So our innovation happens around the chemistry and preparing the sample in the mass spec and the operation of the mass spec and the software that we use to drive that. And then on the data capture side and the software we use to drive that piece. And so our tests are highly complex and they have multiple components all working at the same time: chemistry, physics, as well as software engineering, all of which combine to create the result that we can create.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of a rocket science in the bio and medical world. So you mentioned collecting a lot of data, and definitely AI comes to mind in today's world. So can you talk a little bit about how AI could be leveraged, AI and maybe machine learning, to play a more meaningful role in your process, whether it's in any of the stages, whether it's during the R&D stage of creating tests, or maybe even during the actual operation and execution of these tests. What's the role for AI? Are you an early adopter, or is there some things that maybe cannot be leveraged through AI?
Yeah. We've adopted artificial intelligence, machine learning tools in our lab. Where we've seen the most value so far is it's very good at identifying trends and outliers in lab data. And so we use that from a control perspective, and also just sort of in terms of our normal kind of day-to-day lab operations. The frontier where we're moving now, is predictive recommendations regarding instrument maintenance. These instruments perform complex tasks and operate 18 hours a day, and we need them to be at their top level of performance. That's a laborious task to kind of just check all. We have almost 100 of these tandem aspects to check them on a day-to-day basis. And so we're developing tools to help us predict when we need to move on instrument maintenance, which drives a huge improvement in quality as well as performance of the lab. We're also leveraging AI to help us understand the lab workflows and to reduce as much as possible all the non-value added time in the lab. So we're using AI-based tools to our workflow and drive process improvements. Lab is, all of our samples are tracked using RFID. And so we track every single piece of a sample or a movement in our lab is tracked through. So we have a tremendous amount of data that on a day-to-day basis, one of our people will pick up a sample, scan them through the RFID, move it to another machine, another table, scan it again. All of these bits and pieces of information that are accumulating using AI to understand where the bottlenecks are and to understand how we can sort of take time out of the system. So that's another big area that we're using AI and some of the tools to help us drive our lab processes. Ultimately, we see a lot of value in continuing the feedback loop of using the data and metadata to just continue to drive continuous improvement in process. One of the areas where AI's been a little bit hyped is automating. I mentioned earlier that we have humans who are looking at people who are looking at the peaks of the output of the LCM SMS. One area that's a little bit is the ability for AI to actually read those peaks. We think that's probably something that is less valuable or less critical. We think there's a lot of improvement that we can do in and around our lab process before we ever need to get there. And we may get there at some point, but that's not one of the first things we're using AI for. There is, though, some really interesting stuff that we're exploring now, because there are a lot of really interesting tools out there, especially deriving from this MCP or Model Context Protocol. This is this open standard created by Anthropic, which enables you to connect AI models together in a really easy way. It's sort of like a USB-C port for AI. It's kind of fascinating. And so we're starting to experiment or just do some pilots around enabling our internal systems to talk to each other using agents. This will probably continue to evolve over the next 3 to 5 years, but there's still a lot of human interaction with our lab equipment and with the lab process. This agent-to-agent interaction, this software-to-software interaction, we think will actually start to reduce that over time and create a whole new area of performance improvement. Again, that's still in the future. We're very early on, but MCP, which has only been around a couple of years, we think that's a really exciting area and something that we think has got a lot of promise.
Very interesting. The level of detail of MCPs that are very, very new now on how agents kind of communicate with each other and kind of standardizing that communication. So for you as a doctor, toxicologist, and CEO to know that is pretty interesting and impressive.
Also, we have a fantastic team. We have some amazing people in our organization. And, what we've been able to do over the past year and a half is create a sort of a small cadre of people who are helping us bring AI into the organization in the right way and manage it to the degree that it has to have business value, has to improve quality, has to be compliant. All I'm telling you is essentially deriving from my amazing team who are really driving the frontier here or pushing the frontier here. Like I said, we're excited about some of the things we're seeing. We made an investment in Databricks. We really kind of utilize that platform, and it sort of helps us drive a lot of our data analytics, and sort of utilizing that and the various tools that we're using, I think, put us in really good stead to reap some benefits from this and continue to push the envelope.
Yeah, I think looks like there's a lot of scope here for AI and innovation in your field. So it's great to hear. Changing topics a little bit, one of the things that always fascinates me accompanying innovation is leadership. And you're a company that's backed by a PE firm, Avery Partners. How does that help you as the CEO of the company to prioritize? And is it obviously it's helping you grow and helping you be more successful and help more people. So talk a little bit about how leadership is managed in such an organization.
Right. Avery's a fantastic partner. They're based in Boston. They're a successful private equity firm. Their involvement with us is highly collaborative. The discipline that they bring and the discipline we use internally is that we obviously need to justify the investments and looking for a return on investment. But they're also willing to make some moves that are more strategic, more forward thinking. They've been overall a really great partner, and their main desire is for us to continue to grow the business and be successful, serve our customers, and to really build value. And so in that regard, they've been just great to work with. I think a lot of private equity is probably similar. I think, obviously, my experience is not unlimited, but my guess is that they're probably in the upper echelon of taking that kind of stance because our experience has been great.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about culture. So you're leading teams of scientists and lab people, software engineers, highly qualified and highly educated people. How do you create your culture? And maybe can you describe your culture? And is that something that you proactively engineer, or did it happen to be that way when you joined them?
Yeah, I think the company's always had a really strong culture around science and a focus around innovation. And so that predates me. I can't take credit for that. I think that the company's always had a lot of people here who have really cared a lot about doing good science in the service of our patients and in driving quality to deliver the right result. I think that's always been a great solid foundation. The contribution that I may have made in my own small way is to perhaps create structures and create the environment where our people, our lab and our R&D team and our clinical team and our sales team work collaboratively as much as possible to share ideas and to move forward together. I think one of the things I tell my team, and I think this is true around a lot of organizations, is that it's not difficult to optimize your silo and to run it. All the managers are good, they're effective, they can run their own area efficiently, get everything done. It's the gaps in between where the value is and also where the problems can arise. And so what I continue to emphasize to my group and have over the past several years, and I think something that they are focused on as well now, is the sense that we can, if we work with other people and get ideas and bounce ideas across the organization, that we can drive some additional value and we can be even more effective. So creating forums where you can do a sort of an idea sharing discussion. We have a number of forums inside our organization at the leadership level, and then below that, where we encourage the sort of cross-department, cross-silo kind of collaboration and discussion. They're necessary because the more natural perspective for most people I take is to just work within their lane. And I hear people say constantly at other organizations, stay in your lane, which I think is fine. Except I think you're missing an opportunity, especially in our world. What our customers are telling us can be translated into an opportunity that can flow through our R&D team to our lab that can go back into the market as a new idea, as a new invention. And I think this is what we've been able to do, is shorten up that cycle and do that more quickly and more efficiently. And I think that's been the sort of the enhancement to what was already a fantastically strong platform in terms of its devotion to innovation and science. I think that's where we've built something a little bit different here, maybe slightly more unique. Our company's got about 1,000 employees roughly, and we've got people all around the country. And so we can continue to figure out ways in which we can work together, collaborate. And it's challenging because not everyone's in the same place, but it's something that we work at on a fairly constant basis, because I firmly believe, my team firmly believes, that there's value there in that collaboration. And despite the fact that sometimes it might make things a little bit slower, we've got to work through some additional discussions, but the value that we get from that is usually always exceeds any sort of cost we might incur.
Yeah, that's great. So your work sits at the intersection of addiction, public health, sports integrity, etc. That's a very impactful area for people in general and people in sports, affected people like substance abusers and so on. So there's a lot of responsibility. Do you have any thoughts on, at a maybe national level, what are some of the responsibilities that you feel like you have, and maybe is the country going in the right direction in prioritizing these things? I know, for example, recently fentanyl has been targeted by the government and things like that.
Well, we believe as an organization that every lab that's in our space should be offering its customers the scale and the scope of testing that we offer. Because to not do so means that there's a likelihood that there's things being missed. And I don't think it's the fault of the labs, because there really isn't any accreditation standard or any regulatory standard that says, hey, you've got to be current in the testing that you're offering, or that you have to cover all these bases. And labs are going to do what they do based upon the framework that they're faced with. What we would like to see, I think, as an organization, is a move toward just demanding a higher standard. Demand a higher standard from the labs that are in this space, because the difference between a lab that can test 400 or 350 things, of which 100 are fairly new, versus a lab that can test maybe 200 things, of which maybe none are new, is a pretty different. There's a different information quality that you're getting from those two tests. I'm using that as an example. I'm not saying that everyone's like that. I'm just saying that let's push to create the best that we can. Because I think if you give all doctors the highest and best level of information, then they can act accordingly. They can act with good information and help their patients avoid. I'm a firm believer. I don't think anyone wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to take my life today. Most, if not all, of the people that overdose and die or end up in severe trouble in an emergency room or what have you, a lot of those are accidental. I mean, they're taking things that contain these hidden surprises or adulterants that are kind of new into the market. And so giving doctors the tools enables them to see that before it becomes a severe problem. And so they can say, hey, this behavior, what you've been doing, the risks that you're taking, these are going to end up creating some problems for you. We need to work on that. I think this is an issue that I think as an organization, we feel pretty strongly about. Require labs to be better and have that be a standard, and then give doctors the best information so they can do their job. Because I've talked to customers who've switched to our lab, and one of the enduring themes I get from my interactions with customers is, I never knew what I know now. I never saw this before. And I say, what you don't know can hurt. We see our job as risk management. I mean, we're a lab, but we basically provide risk management to doctors to use as a tool with their patients. This is a risky area. Patients need help. They want treatment. The environment is full of threats. We can help them avoid these to some degree, to a large degree, but let's have that be the norm rather than the exception. And I think that's really where we are as an organization. And I think if we did that as a country, perhaps, over time, we would begin to see a change. What we see in our data is that testing and identifying these things enables patients to avoid them. Once they're aware of the threat, they can avoid the threat. And we see that in our data. We're going to publish some stuff pretty soon where we're going to show demonstrably that repeated testing over a period of time with a series of patients, and we've got over 600 in our sample, shows a demonstrable change in the range of things that you find, and that translates into a better quality of life.
Oh, great point. So lastly, today, I would like your thoughts on the next generation of innovators, of engineers, of scientists that are coming up. You've been in the industry for quite a while and you have seen a lot of change come through. So I'd like to hear your advice to the up-and-comers.
Sure. I think the important part that a lot of us miss is that we skip the piece where we actually have to get other people to work with us and to do things with us. And so the ability to persuade, to listen, to collaborate, to build shared understanding, common ground, to drive toward a common goal, to build a team, all of these are people, human factors. I mean, you can be a fantastic scientist, a wonderful engineer, a great doctor, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, and I've seen this, if you can't get people to work with you, or you are unable to get other people, to get anyone to understand what it is that you think is so important, it's going to be really hard for you. So don't neglect the soft stuff. Don't neglect the culture. Don't neglect the skills that are around working with other people, because despite all the AI and, MCP and all the agents that are coming, we're going to still need to work with each other to get things done. And so don't lose sight of that. And I think that's where I would probably encourage people. My own experience was that for the first piece of my career, I think I neglected that to some degree. And I really only understood that more clearly probably in my sort of last 20 years compared to my first 20 years. And I've been working over 40 years now. I think if I could talk to my 30-year-old self again, or 25, I'd probably re-emphasize that this is something that you will go further faster if you can figure out how to work with other people in a way that's collaborative and oriented toward a team goal. And I think that's really important.
Very well said. Dr. Frank, thank you so much for your time today. I think it's been very informative and a lot of things for people to listen to and appreciate. So thanks again for your time, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Seth. I appreciate the time, and it was great talking to you.